Hello guys, welcome back to another virtual MOSI. My name is Mark and I'll be talking to you guys for about the next 15 minutes or so about my personal favorite medieval siege weapon, which is the Catapult. You might have seen from the promotional image that we have that today is going to be all about catapults. Now, you guys might be wondering, what exactly is a catapult? A catapult essentially was a weapon that was designed to launch projectiles, mainly large rocks, at castle walls repeatedly until the wall was actually able to fall down, and then the invading army would be able to enter on in. Now there's a couple different iterations of the catapult, but today we are going to be making something called a desktop catapult. So this thing will only be able to launch small objects like marshmallows. Awesome, so let's get started. Now before we delve into building our catapult, there's actually a couple of physics things I want to talk to you guys about, because catapults essentially rely on basic physics to work. And a catapult itself, in case you didn't see, is essentially just a giant lever. And that lever is going to use the properties of force as well as potential and kinetic energy. Now, for those of you who saw Mr. Jose's video about our kinetic art activity, we're going to be using some of the same topics from that. So put on those thinking helmets and think back. I think it was 3 weeks ago now. But essentially, we can show all this with just one plastic spoon. Now this is your average run-of-the-mill plastic spoon that you can get from any of your favorite restaurants or even the grocery store as well. And it essentially comes down to 3 different topics. The first is going to be potential and kinetic energy. So potential energy is essentially the potential for energy to happen. I know that's kind of redundant using potential twice, but that's the best way to explain it. It's the option that this, when I release, is going to push the bowl of the spoon directly upwards. Right? And so when you pull it back, you're essentially creating potential energy. And that potential energy is then going to be transformed into kinetic energy once I let the tip of the spoon go. Now, that is similar to force, because force is essentially mass times acceleration. So if I were to put a little marshmallow in my spoon here, and I increase the potential energy of my marshmallow, right, taking into account how heavy the marshmallow is, when I let go of the spoon, it's going to throw my marshmallow up into the air, and that is going to be how fast my marshmallow is going, and then that's going to determine how hard the marshmallow is going to hit. So I'm going to let this go in 3, 2, and you can see just how quickly that was shot up into the air. Now, of course, we are inside of a room, so my marshmallow couldn't continue going up all the way into the heavens. And that's not just because it hits the ceiling and bounces back down, but it's because something called gravity. So I mentioned there are 3 topics. We already talked about potential and kinetic energy, as well as force. But one other factor to consider when choosing the materials for your own personal catapult, which I know you guys will be raring to try out as soon as I stop talking, but it's also elasticity. So elasticity is essentially just how much something can bend before it breaks. And so the plastic spoon, which you guys have seen me bend a few times, has a pretty decent elasticity, right? If I were to continue to bend this, eventually it's gonna snap. Right? And you could see just how much that was able to bend before it did snap. Right? Now, something like a rubber band or an elastic band, if you would, is going to be something that stretches quite a bit more. And you can see just how large it is able to or how far it's able to stretch. And I'm going to keep stretching it, even though it's going to hurt my thumbs. Okay, well, look at that. Look how far this is able to stretch without breaking. And so I'm not even going to continue stretching it because this is already hurting my thumbs. So we can see, but it is able to go back to its original state, which is why our spoon only has a certain elasticity, because it breaks and then it can't go back to its original state. Now, something like a pencil or the materials that we make buildings out of don't have as much elasticity. So I don't know if you guys can see, but it's barely bending before it is able to break. right? And so a pencil, has a lower elasticity than something like a spoon. So consider that as you guys are choosing what materials you are going to have to make your catapult here today, because everything that I've been going to be showing you, let me put it that way, can be made using popsicle sticks or pencils, or even you have a whole bunch of rulers sitting around your house. Those are all things that you can use. Alright, so let's first get into our very first example of a catapult. Now for this one, I'm going to be using some crafting sticks. Now if you go to the grocery store and get some popsicles, you can keep them and then you can use them to create your own catapult after you have a delicious treat. Or if you go to certain box stores, you can buy these in a box, just like I have here. Now the first one is going to be probably the simplest catapults that you can make, and it is essentially going to look a little something like this. So I have about 8 popsicle sticks in my stack. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be taking my rubber band. And if you don't have rubber bands at home, you can use old shoelaces. You can use something like a hot glue gun to glue it together. But I find rubber bands work great because they're a little bit more forgiving than hot glue. And you'll see what I mean when we move on to our next catapult, is that if you mess something up, it's a lot easier to shift rubber bands around than to try to peel hot glue that has been solidified off of wood. Awesome. So we have we have our stack of popsicle sticks. Now essentially this is going to be the fulcrum which the lever is going to rest upon. For the next one, you're going to take 2 popsicle sticks and you're just going to wrap the rubber band around one single side. Wonderful.
You mentioned that there's a kid at school that has a pencil that bends a lot. Do you think that would work?
Oh, yes, I do think that would work. And different pencils are made out of different woods. So depending on what you're going for, you can. So for the ones that we're going to be making now, it's really good to have a very elastic type of wood. But when we get to some of the later ones, we rely on not necessarily the elasticity of the material, but of using the fulcrum to carry the power over. So that's a good question. So yes, you can make these with pencils. So we have our 2 that are tied together on end. And if you have any plastic spoons, you can go ahead and you can take your rubber band and wrap it around that one. I'm just going to do this. So yes, wonderful question. Also, if you guys have any other questions, feel free to comment on down below. Now, we are reaching the end of the month of May, so I do want to remind you guys that for the month of May, until the end of it, we do have a discount on our memberships, I believe of 30%. And if you guys are interested in coming to our summer camps that are going to be happening at the beginning of June until mid-August, those you also get a discount on if you are a member as well. So be sure to check out our website if any of that sounded interesting to you. Now, we have adhered not very well because I'm trying to go quick. We have adhered my spoon to my 2 popsicle sticks. And what we're going to do now is we are just going to slide our stopping block into it. So it looks a little bit like that. Now, once we're done, what we can do is we can find a marshmallow, and we have a bunch of marshmallows specifically for science. They say do not eat. And so what's going to happen now is I'm going to load my catapults up with a marshmallow, and I'm sure you guys at home can probably guess what's going to happen because we saw what happened with the spoon when we test the elasticity. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase the potential energy, and I'm going to shoot my marshmallow up. Now I want you guys to pay close attention to the path of the marshmallow, and I'm going to turn sideways so hopefully you guys can see it a little bit better. Now I'm over here at the end of my table, and we are 2 tables wide, right? And so I am going to again load up my catapults. I'm going to increase the potential energy, and I'm going to shoot it. All right, so that went pretty far, right? These tables are about 6 feet across, so it probably went about 11 or so feet, right? And so when that marshmallow flew up in the air, it did something we call a parabola. And a parabola is essentially a way that is essentially the way that objects move on Earth when you throw them. So essentially, I'm sorry, I keep saying essentially. So it looks like this, right? When I launched my marshmallow, and I'm going to draw a very crude catapult here. Does that look like a catapult? Yeah, cool. Maxwell says good. And so when I have my catapult here, I launch my marshmallow. And now everything on Earth has to contend with two things in life: taxes and, of course, gravity. Now, when I launch my marshmallow, it is defying gravity, right? It is through with expectations, and it is defying them, and it is flying upwards. But as you guys saw earlier, eventually my marshmallow started going down. And so once it reaches the apex, that's the top of the parabola, gravity starts to take hold, and it begins to pull my projectile back down to the ground. Right? And so throughout this entire thing, gravity just doesn't start taking into effect here when it starts pulling it down, but it's already affecting it right here. Right? And that's where force and acceleration come into play. Because gravity has always been affecting my marshmallow. But just like when we send rockets up into the sky, when we catapulted our marshmallow up into the air, the force and the acceleration were more powerful than gravity, right? But as time went on in our arc, gravity still is happening, began to slow down our marshmallow and pull it back down to the ground. Now, our parabola went up pretty high and only went about 11 feet. Now, I think we could actually get a parabola that's a little bit more efficient than that. Because remember, these were originally designed to hurl giant boulders at castles, and you don't want to be close enough to the castle that they could hit you back with arrows, right? So the catapults themselves have to be very efficient at throwing stuff. And that's actually going to be at a 45-degree angle. If you guys can see my parabola here right now, this looks more like 30 degrees or so. It's not super tall. And so this is actually going to fly higher than it is farther, right? And so that was the parabola that we just talked about. Now we're going to walk you guys through another way to create a catapult. And this one's a little bit more intensive, but it is a little bit more fun to do. So I have made this with popsicle sticks again. I do have some tape. I have some rubber bands. But you can also make it with hot glue. This one is something that I made with hot glue as well. And I mentioned I have found it's easier to use rubber bands, because hot glue, you have to make sure everything is perfect. Otherwise, like mine, it will rock back and forth because the legs aren't all the same length. But when we make it with our rubber band, these are things that we can still shift up and down if we need to. So first things first, what you're going to do is, and if you're also using pencils, make sure that you're doing, you have enough before you begin. We're going to be using 10 total popsicle sticks, 3 for each of the sides. And for these guys, what we're going to be doing is we are going to be taking 2 popsicle sticks together, and we are going to be wrapping a rubber band around them. And I found it's most efficient to wrap it around a few times and then to bring under, so it looks a little something like that. And then we're going to do another popsicle stick here until we have both sides done. And I pre-made these for you guys, so it's a little bit easier for me to talk about. Now, what we have to do is we have to connect both of these sides, because these are going to be our legs. Now, in medieval times, catapults had wheels on them because they were relatively large to throw rocks and stuff. But since these are just desktop catapults, then these do not need wheels. But feel free, if you have the materials or think you can create wheels on your own, go right ahead. We'd love to see them. If you want to send them to our Facebook page or our Instagram page, that would be awesome. So catapults are still used today, and especially in this wonderful pandemic time, this desktop catapult is great to leave at your desk so you can fling marshmallows at people who get too close.
So we had Randy comment that she used to use peas in the cafeteria.
Ah.
Are there things you can use at home, like peas or marshmallows?
Yes, you can use peas. Realistically, anything small that you got. If you chop up carrots into little discs, that would be fine. If you're outside and there's some gravel, go right ahead. But remember, friends, don't do gravel inside because you don't want to break anything. And you also don't want to make sure that when you're launching things, you're not launching it at anybody, because it could potentially hurt them. And that's not something we here at MOSI want. So I have attached my very first support here, and you can see it's kind of wonky, right? But when we add our second support, that's going to even itself out. Now, I want to talk you guys through how I was able to add this support, because I've gone through a couple different iterations of this for you guys and for my own personal benefit. And I find that if you take a rubber band, put it in two, and then wrap it around one, you can come on through, and I'll hold this up to the camera so you guys can see. And so with the rubber band on the outside, you take it and you wrap, oh, I'm sorry, I'm going the wrong way. So you take it and you wrap it around the bottom stick over to the other side. So it looks a little something like that. That's the, oh, I'm sorry, I'm not seeing where the camera is. That's the outside, and then this right here is going to be the inside. And that I found has been the best way to adhere rubber bands to popsicle sticks that are not flush with each other if they're perpendicular. I'm going to do this to the other side. Now, what was I going to say? I started saying something. Oh, so comment below if you guys can think of any other modern uses that catapults are used for in today's day and age, because it's not just for throwing marshmallows. There's actually some other uses for catapults.
So they mentioned cubicle warfare when we're back in our offices.
Yes, cubicle warfare is definitely a thing, especially if all of your coworkers are super cool, like all of our coworkers here at MOSI are. I'm sure nobody will mind if I start beaming them with marshmallows later on.
And Brian said that having marshmallows and maybe catapults at meetings would make them more fun.
I also agree with that. Wonderful. So we have our catapult going here, and so voila, awesome. Now if you have it in a right spot and you can kind of, I don't know if you guys can see, but this keeps popping closed on me. You can take some tape, any tape will do. I have a very brightly colored duct tape that I'm just going to place over some of my rubber bands to make sure that they are staying in the right spot and they're not collapsing and bouncing around on me as time goes on. Wonderful.
So we have a few different uses. Launching fighter jets off aircraft carriers.
Exactly.
Launching treats for your pet.
Yes, wonderful. Those are both good ideas. But yeah, the United States military uses catapult-like contraption on aircraft carriers to launch fighter jets because the runway is actually too short. And so what a catapult does is it gives it more acceleration. It uses more force and acceleration to send them up into the sky quicker. And that's one of the ways that they're able to launch those airplanes so quickly instead of having a nice long runway for them to go on down. Wonderful. So I know we are almost out of time here today. And so in medieval times and in the Middle Ages, the people who were creating catapults didn't actually have rubber bands like we're going to be using today. So they actually used something called, well, they used rope, not something called rope, it is rope. And they used a technique called torsion. And so if you guys don't know what that is, make sure you tune in tomorrow, because Mr. Jose, my coworker, is going to be talking a little bit about torsion when he's making his rubber band cars. Awesome. So I have the base of my catapult here all set and done. Now I'm going to place one more right up top here, and you guys can probably start to see how my my catapult is starting to take shape. And so I'm going to add both of these on, and what will happen is I will add this across the top, and then I'm going to add another one perpendicular to that, so it looks a little something like this. And when you put it all together, it will look something like so. Now, if you look at it from the side, you can see that the angle of the spoon is actually at a 45-degree angle. So when I place this in the exact same spot as my original catapult, and I'm able to then launch it, let's see how far this one goes. Comment below if you guys think it'll actually go farther or shorter than the first marshmallow, which I did leave at the end of the table there. Alrighty, we are going to go. Get your comments in now. What are we thinking? Anybody yet? Alrighty, 3, 2, 1. Aha! So it went just about as far, and it went a little bit farther than that as well. So it came all the way to here. And that's because the parabola was more efficient. Wonderful.
Janet, Brian, Nikki, and Catherine all said farther.
Nice, that's awesome. Now, there are a couple reasons why, even though this is at a 45-degree angle, it wouldn't go as far, and that's because there's not as much potential energy, right? This, when we flicked it, was very quick, versus this is just held together by some rubber bands. Now, if you have something, this one I made a little bit tighter, and you can see when I bend it, it actually bends the stick underneath. So there's a whole bunch of tension in there. And if I do this one from the same exact spot, oh, it's too powerful. It hits the ceiling before it can go. This one is actually the best one. It does go the farthest because that has good tension in there. Wonderful. So make sure that you guys tune in tomorrow, because I want to challenge you guys to use today's lesson and tomorrow's lesson with Mr. Jose to see if you can create a torsion catapult. Wonderful. I want to thank you guys for tuning in today. Make sure that you check in with us every weekday at 1:30 for Virtual MOSI. Reminder that our summer camps are beginning the 1st of June, and we do have a membership deal going on for the rest of the month of May. Thanks for stopping by, and keep discovering.